So here we're looking specifically at the bones of the arm. In the upper arm we've got the humerus, so there's one bone constituting the upper arm, and in the lower arm or forearm we've got two bones. On the thumb side we've got what's called the radius, and on the pinky side or the fifth phalange side we've got what's called the ulnar. So when looking at it like this, this would have to therefore be a left arm, because thumb being on this side, this being on the lateral side, it would look like that. So looking more specifically at how the actual joints go together here and how the shapes influence what type of joint it is. You can see at the proximal end of the humerus, this is up here at the shoulder end, it's a round cylinder or spherical type appearance. This creates the ball in the ball and socket joint that is called the shoulder. It's also the more correct anatomical name for the shoulder joint is the glenohumeral joint, because as we'll later learn, it joins the glenoid cavity of the scapula, and my hand here would represent the scapula, with the humerus. So the glenohumeral joint is the shoulder joint. And of course that ball, meaning it can work on all axes, and we'll learn in later tutorials how that ball and socket joint can move in all directions. At the distal end of the humerus, we've got a cylinder type shape. And this is actually called the trochlea. Well, there's several parts of it, but trochlea is this main part of the cylinder. And you can see that how the ulnar actually attaches and wraps in around this cylinder type shape. Now this allows flexion and extension to occur at the elbow. Now another sort of common error that happens is, notice that a lot of people think that the radius here is making up part of the elbow, but whilst it comes right up to the humerus, it actually doesn't in any way touch that humerus. The radius is connected to the ulnar and not the humerus. So the elbow joint is just the ulnar attaching around this cylinder to the humerus, and the radius coming up, not forming part of that elbow joint. But what does conjoin, where it does join, is at the ulnar here, at what's called the proximal radioulnar joint. So it's where the radius meets the ulnar at the proximal end, and then again at the other end, where the radius meets the ulnar at the distal end. So this would be the distal radioulnar joint. Now at the proximal radioulnar joint, what happens is, in order for movement to occur at this joint, the round head, which is created part of a pivot joint, which we'll learn about later, creates movements of pronation and supination at this joint. So it's the rotating of this radius which creates that pronation and supination. Notice here at the distal end of the radius that it forms or joins part of this wrist joint, which is called the radiocarpal joint. And this is actually a condyloid joint, which we'll learn about in later tutorials. But notice how the ulnar doesn't really join or touch the carpals. So an easy way to distinguish between the radius and the ulnar, and particularly the ends of the radius and ulnar, is that the radius forms part of the wrist joint, which is the condyloid joint. The ulnar does not, but at the proximal end, the ulnar forms part of the elbow and the radius does not.